Small children haunt these very streets. There's been loads of strange stories told, loads of strange experiences had by people featuring small children. Now a little bit more modern history will show you where the stories have come from. About where the trees are years ago, imagine a big impressive building on that site called the Industrial Ragged School. And think Oliver Twist, that sort of time period, this is what we're looking at. Now the school was opened up by a local man, the parish beadle, a man called George Pym. He was a cruel, heartless man employed by the church. And his job was keeping streets in the parish clear of kids. Waifs, strays, orphans, they weren't allowed to wander freely or sleep rough. They were rounded up and placed in institutions like the Rag School. Paid by the local churches for his job, he crammed as many kids as possible into the school. The more kids, the more money he received. But he wasn't satisfied with that. He made money off the kids. He leased them out as cheap labour to farmers, market traders and chimney sweeps. They came along on a regular basis and took kids away to work in the various places. The kids worked long, hard hours. They were dressed in rags, bare feet. In the middle of winter they worked on farms, market stalls. They were taken away by sweeps. If I can put you through briefly what the kids would go through on a fairly day-to-day basis. Now you think Oliver Twist, you think Charles Dickens sort of books, they were nothing like the reality that the kids actually went through in these days. Very, very harsh, very gritty times. The kids came back to the school half-starved, very tired, horrific injuries. Sometimes the kids who worked long-term for the sweeps, they went blind. Their eyesight damaged permanently by chemicals in the chimneys that had been made to sweep. And that made them ideal for the sweeps to use again and again and again. The kids were fed a basic diet, thin watery soup or stew, always made from leftovers from days before, then laid down to sleep if they were lucky on wooden benches. If they weren't so lucky, the cold stone floor was their bed for the night. To try and keep warm, they'd cuddle into small groups, they'd pull straw over themselves. Darkness fell, they tried to sleep. The rats came, nibbling the fingers and toes, licking the sores on the bodies. You'd imagine the kids not living long and happy lives. Disease must have been rife. From time to time, kids died. George Pym returned to the church and told them that a child had died. The church came along, removed the body, gave it a decent Christian burial. They crossed the name off the book. They stopped paying the money for that child. He realised the council came along to bring him children. They came once a week to pay for those children. They never once came to count heads and see how many kids still lived in the school. He decided in future that if a child died and he hid the body instead, who would ever know? No one would ever find out, and best of all, he'd still get the money for that child. He began hiding bodies as children died. The school remained open for 8 years. In the 8-year period, George Pym is known to have hidden at least 13 children within the grounds and walls of the Rag School. Not long after these events, George Pym began to complain of a strange atmosphere that seemed to fill the building. He began hearing noises as the children took their revenge. He became terrified of the place, especially as darkness fell. The noises started fairly simply, scratchings and tappings coming from the walls and floors. They continued, but they changed to sobs and moans, low crying sounds. The strange thing about the noises was, no one else ever heard them. Only George Pym ever complained about them, as if they meant purely and simply for him alone. He said the noises continued, but again they changed. They became much more sinister. There were screams and howls, tortured wails in the night. On many occasions, George Pym was woke from his sleep. Well, he'd taken quite heavily now to the bottle. Drinking more, sleeping less, his eyes were wild. He'd mumble and ramble to anyone who'd listen about voices. Children's voices he kept hearing, coming from the walls and floors of the Rag School. No one else had ever heard the noises. They thought the drink was taking its toll, and George Pym was going mad. Many complaints arrived at the church's door, and in the end, they paid the school a visit. They were horrified by what they found. The school had fallen into a very bad state. They closed it down. Kids that remained there were taken away, divided up among local churches, but George Pym ended up in a mental home called Bedern, just outside York, and that's where he spent the rest of his life. And that wasn't long. He'd been there 4 months when his body was found, hanging by his belt from a hook in the ceiling. He'd been driven, he claimed, in a note left behind to have taken his own life. Driven by voices of children, those bodies he'd hidden in the Rag School, those voices had followed him all the way to the mental home, at Naburn.